Good morning, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Environmental Social Justice. Today, I'm talking to Max Berry, who is an expert in climate change and the economy. So welcome, Max.
Thanks for having me.
Of course, we do have a little bit of delay, guys, so don't read too much into that. Talking to Max, I believe you're in Lyon, France.
Yes, I'm based in France, and I'm attached to the University of Lyon. That's true.
Excellent. So you and I have spoken quite a few times, and one of the things that we have agreed upon is that climate change is affecting the economy and that everything is connected. Everything is a chain reaction to each other. So in a brief way, could you explain how climate change is affecting the economy right now?
Sure. Let's say three things to remember. So first, we can say that habitability and economic performance of some key economic regions is being affected directly by climate change. And there we can think about changes to arable land and the economic productivity of agriculture. You have to consider that in the developing world and in emerging markets in particular, the agricultural industry is quite a sizable chunk of the economy. Less so in the developed world. For example, in the United States, I think it's around 2% of the GDP. But in a country which is say located in Southeast Asia or in South Asia, it would be a bit different. Okay. Also, when you think of habitability, you can think of that rising sea levels and changing weather events have affected both tourist regions, such as, for example, the famous hurricane that hit Puerto Rico very recently, but also real economic heartlands, right? Because a lot of industrialized countries, their economic heartland tends to be coastal regions. So it's not just in the U.S. with East and West Coast, but also if you look here in the European Union, you have the so-called Blue Banana region, which is mostly the North Sea and Channel coast, down, and it curves down towards the Alps. And if you look at the Asia Pacific region, it's also the case that the economic heartland is the Chinese East Coast, the Pearl River Delta, and the East Coast of Japan, right? So all of these are affected by extreme weather events and by changes in sea level. So let's say that for emerging countries, we have impacts on agriculture and tourism, and for industrialized countries, we have impacts to the economic heartland region. So that's the direct impact. Now, then we have two indirect impacts as well to keep in mind. The first is that changes in climate have made accessible some polar regions for mining, for logistics purposes, and so we can in the future we may see more mining and more oil exploration and more gas exploration in the Arctic Sea, in the Arctic Sea region, and along the Arctic coasts of Alaska, Canada, Greenland, and Siberia. So we're going to see some impact of that. And thirdly, is that there is also rising demand and rising interest and rising government funding even for renewable energy, renewable infrastructure, for clean tech, all the way around. So these are the big things. So loss in productivity of some affected regions, increasing accessibility of polar regions, and increasing demand, therefore investment in renewables and clean technologies. Those are the three things.
Okay, so I am surprised that there is increasing exploration in oil and gas.
Why does it surprise you?
Well, I mean, we are trying to get away from the petroleum industry. We are trying to do more with renewable energy.
Well, I want to say that that's true. That if you consider we to be basically the first world developed countries, and definitely a lot of economic interest in that development. But if you look at some of the middle income developing countries who are doing industrial growth, these are generating these are some of the generating the demand for fossil fuels. And also, you may consider that even given the size of the GDP of I want to say the U.S. and the EU and the Asia Pacific markets, even if most of the growth in the energy markets were to be shifted towards renewables overnight, there would still be some substantial amounts of growth in fossil fuel demand and fossil fuel use. A good example of that would be if you look at Japan, right? So right after the Fukushima disaster in 2011, you had a sort of a temporary shutdown of the nuclear sector, and since then you've seen the fourth, fifth, and sixth strategic energy plans, which have been towards a shift towards renewable energy, particularly geographically diversified and diffused renewable generation technology in the Japanese market. That being said, there has been also some substantial growth in imports in the Japanese market since Fukushima. So let's say that you consider that as a GDP grows, the energy market is growing as well. So even a sized slice of an ever-growing pie will be ever-growing demand. So this is, I think, the unfortunate reality of what the 20th has in store as we go along.
Well, that's enlightening. I mean, that is good to know that less developed countries start to pull away from petroleum demand, that we won't really solve our climate crisis until that happens. So that's actually important for people to understand.
Right. I would like to say also that there's another thing to consider, and that is that as we here in the global north are constantly replacing our technology, the technology that we do replace, it doesn't go to the scrapyard immediately. A lot of it ends up in secondhand use in developing and emerging markets. And that is not just for energy, but it's for all sorts of industrial technologies, and even for transit technologies. So what that is to say is that the polluting technologies that we have today, 20 years from now, might be most active in a market like Brazil, for example. But the clean technology that we're replacing it with will also someday make its way to the developing markets. So it's really important. It's really important for us here in Europe and the States and the Asia Pacific region to lead by example. It's really establish the markets and the best practices.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. It's very important that people understand that we do have to lead other countries. Impact investing is huge, helping these developing countries get access to funding so they can have renewable energy, so they can have the infrastructure and technology.
funding, supply chains, and technological best practices. Three things, actually.
Oh. Yeah, no, technological best practices are very important. And this is a series, just so everybody knows, Max and I, we talk a lot. He has a ton of information that I think is important for everybody to know, especially how everything's connected. So this is not just our first interview with Max, that we're going to have several. But before we go on for hours, because we don't have time for that, I do want to, kind of transition from the impact investing, from, developing countries, new technology. How is transportation of goods going to be affected? Because climate change is going to impact that in a massive way.
For sure. Okay, I think there are some things which are clear, and there are some things which could go in a few different ways, actually, right? So the thing which is the most clear, I would say, is that the increasing navigability of polar waters is gonna mean that we're gonna see a lot of we're gonna see increased maritime activity, maritime commercial activity, so shipping of goods and stuff across particularly the Arctic Sea. And the shipping routes will be open for more months of the year, and so anyone who's been sort of following any of the recent economic news about the supply side bottlenecks, whether they're calling it inflation, whether they're calling it sort of clogged supply chains, basically. What we're seeing is that we've more or less started to hit the limits of our current maritime and port capacity, right? So it's really going to place a lot of incentive for the development of new and diversified shipping routes. And if you consider the different countries and different markets who have access to the Arctic Sea coast, right? So just for example, imagine the St. Lawrence Seaway. Imagine the Canadian market that has of course direct infrastructural connection to many parts of the United States. Now, meanwhile, here in Europe, similar things could be said for the Scandinavian coast, right? The upper coast of Norway.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, all of Scandinavia, they used to be, crushed in ice. And now all of that's melting, so there are routes coming through. And I forget who, it was probably 5 or 6 years ago, I met with Tony Blair. I had the opportunity to meet him at an event, and they were talking about building shipping routes through the Arctic. And that kind of blew my mind at the time. I guess
yeah. Well, I think it's important to remember that it's going to be both maritime and also port.
Yeah.
I think we're also going to see the increasing transpolar flights as well, for business purposes. Both of them are definitely going to have an impact. That being said, there is a bit of good news on the environmental front as well when we see what's coming, because as the 21st century develops, I think we've basically started to understand the importance of first rail travel, right? And regardless of I guess regardless of how that's developed, particularly in the United States, it's considering that in both European markets and in particular in the Asia Pacific, especially China, high-speed rail is just growing and growing and growing and growing. Now, if you consider rail to be an economic substitute for road travel and also for road freight shipment, you can see that the development of rail infrastructure is gonna have some effect of reducing the amount of miles being driven in many European and Asia Pacific markets. And the second thing that's important to remember is the growth of the I want to say the clean or the green economy. It has a strong element of modularization to it, right? So basically, what we're gonna say that the problem of replacing polluting economic activity with cleaner economic activity or greener economic activity is going to have a lot of small interlocking parts to it. And so what I wanted to say is that going to play an increasing role across the 21st century as the country develops. So a good example with rail travel. Well, the more that the rail and also light rail within major urban centers develops, the more it's going to become electrified, right? And now it's also the case as energy markets grow, they're going to become more renewable over time. So if we can think about the environmental impact of travel as consisting of the parts of like what type of vehicle, what type of energy are they using, and how is that energy supplied to the vehicles, we can basically that's three areas that when the reforms are made in all three, then you have a much cleaner, much greener transportation infrastructure and environment. And that's the way we're heading. So Europe likes to see itself as a world leader in this respect. But that being said, it's also the case in many of the other key markets in the world.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a huge fan of rail. My family has a history in the train industry. America does need to catch up. Our rail system's not great, but we're getting there. We're building it. Most importantly, though, is the transportation of goods. I mean, whenever I'm out on the road or on the highway, I see semi-truck after semi-truck after semi-truck. And if we could get those goods onto a rail and get it off the streets and off the highways, I think it would vastly improve not only our carbon footprint, but emissions, safety for drivers, safety for people transporting the goods. I think that's hugely important because we do see a lot of wrecks. So I will end on that because we have so many more topics that I don't want to go over. But I mean, you and I have talked about heat. We've talked about workers that work outdoors, how the workforce is going to be affected. There are so many things to discuss. So stay tuned, guys. Max will be coming back. Please forgive the connection. He's in Lyon, France, which has very old buildings with really thick walls. So Wi-Fi is a little hard. So on that, thank you, Max. This has been wonderful. We will definitely be seeing you again, hopefully the next week. Thank you, guys. You all take care. Have a wonderful day, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.